Why was her face pressed against cold metal, while guards rifled through her pockets? Olivia stood in the dim weapons bay, hands raw from hours of work, when Commander Jackson Morrill burst through the door like a storm with a grudge. His face twisted, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. A low-tier mechanic has no right touching restricted systems. That's what he said. That's all it took. Two guards grabbed her arms, slammed her forward, drove her down until her cheek hit the floor so hard she tasted copper. The cuffs bit into her wrists, metal teeth against skin, while someone yanked her ID badge from her pocket. Maintenance staff. That's what it said. That's all they saw, nothing more. Then the guard shoved her sleeve up, rough hands searching for contraband marks, and there it was. Black ink on pale skin. A panther coiled and ready etched into her inner wrist. The guard froze, just for a second. His eyes narrowed like he was solving a puzzle. Then he scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear, dismissing it as cheap parlor work, some backstreet artist's doodle. The cuffs were about to lock with that final, defining click when the bay door exploded open with a sound that made hearts stop. Admiral Roderick Hale stormed in, uniform crisp, voice like thunder rolling across an angry sea. "Release her. Now, look at that tattoo." The room went silent, the kind of silence where you can hear your own pulse hammering in your ears, because the woman they'd been mocking, the one they'd thrown to the floor like trash, wasn't some nobody scraping by in the engine rooms. She was the ghost, the last surviving Black Panther operative, the legend every officer in the fleet had been trained to fear. But it didn't start there. It never does. Stories like this don't begin with the moment everything breaks open. They begin earlier, quieter, in the slow accumulation of small cruelties that build until something has to give. Kaylin Voss had been on the Aegis 9 for 3 weeks, and in those 21 days she had learned what it meant to be invisible. Not the good kind of invisible, the kind spies dream about. The other kind. The kind where people look through you like you're a smudge on glass. She was 26, with the kind of beauty that didn't demand attention. Soft features, dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, freckles across her nose that she never bothered to hide with makeup. She wore the standard jumpsuit, baggy and stained from real work, nothing tailored, nothing that said, "Look at me." And they didn't. They looked past her, around her, anywhere but at her. The onboarding process had been designed to strip dignity before she even turned her first wrench. Sergeant Hatcher, the quartermaster, didn't look up when she presented her transfer papers. He just pointed one calloused finger toward a pile in the corner. Rejected uniforms. Too big, too small, too stained with someone else's sweat. When she reached for a clean pair of boots, his hand slammed down on the counter like a gunshot. "Those are for officers." His sneer was practiced, perfected over years of crushing new arrivals. You take the salvage. If you wanted comfort, you should have joined a cruise line. She took the worn gear without a word. Her face showed nothing while he joked to his assistant about wasting good fabric on deck rats who wouldn't last a month. Even getting her access codes became a lesson in humiliation. New officers got biometric wristbands that opened doors with a wave. She stood outside the security office for 3 hours while those officers breezed past her to the front of the line. When the clerk finally called her forward, he didn't issue a wristband. He dropped a heavy, outdated magnetic swipe card into the trash slot on the counter, made her fish it out with her fingers. "The biometric scanners are for essential personnel only." His tone said she wasn't essential, would never be essential. "This will get you into the maintenance shafts and waste disposal units. Don't try accessing the promenade or observation deck. Alarms will trigger. Security enjoys the target practice." He laughed. She didn't. She just pocketed the card and left before he could erase her presence any more than he already had. Her quarters were another calculated insult. Deep in the ship's bowels, where ventilation was a suggestion and the engine's thrum vibrated through your bones even when you tried to sleep. It wasn't a room. It was a converted storage closet, damp, smelling of hydraulic fluid and mildew. The bunk was a metal slab with a mattress so thin the rivets poked through. A pipe overhead leaked steady drops that formed a slick puddle near the door. As she unpacked her few belongings, junior officers passed by, one holding his nose theatrically while his friends laughed. Smells like something died in there. Perfect spot for a stray. Just don't bring any fleas to the main deck. Kaylin placed a bucket under the leak. The steady plink, plink, plink marked her first hour. The humiliation extended to the most basic human need. Hygiene became a battle for endurance. The communal showers for maintenance staff ran on recycled gray water, freezing cold or scalding hot with no middle ground. When Kaylin stepped into a stall that morning trying to wash grease from her hair, the water cut out after 10 seconds. Outside, logistics officers leaned against the control panel, laughing as they toggled the valve on and off. Whoops, looks like the pressure's temperamental today. Maybe if you beg, we can find a few drops, or you can rinse off in waste disposal. It's all the same water anyway. They left it off for 5 full minutes, forcing her to stand shivering in cold air, then blasted it back on near boiling. Her pain was their morning entertainment. Even food became a weapon. The synthesis dispensers in the lower mess were locked to her clearance level. A steward noticed her confusion but didn't help. Just pointed to a murky gray nutrient paste vat, emergency rations usually reserved for blockades. Fresh synth is for crew who actually fly the ship. He slapped gray sludge onto a dented tray that looked like it came from a scrap heap. This provides all the calories a manual laborer needs. Don't complain, or I'll give you the batch that's been sitting since the last sector jump. She took the tray without a word. The texture was gritty, flavorless. Officers at the next table savored roasted meats and fresh greens, making a show of throwing leftovers into the incinerator rather than offering scraps to the lower decks. Almost immediately after, she was assigned a hazardous cleaning task strictly against regulation for anyone without a protective exosuit. Lieutenant Brevin, the safety officer who hated paperwork, tossed her a simple respirator mask. We're short on gear and the fumes aren't that bad. Just hold your breath if it stings. The task involved scrubbing the inside of a coolant tank where toxic residue had built up. Within minutes, her eyes burned. Her throat closed. She finished the job anyway, emerged coughing, vision blurred, while Brevin stood at a safe distance reviewing his tablet. Good work. You didn't die. Most don't make it through their first exposure. Welcome to the real fleet. But there was something they didn't know, something she hadn't told them, not yet. Why did she accept it all without a single word of protest? That question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. Kaylin didn't complain, didn't file reports, didn't raise her voice or demand better treatment. She just moved through her days like water flowing around stones, silent and relentless. Some mistook it for weakness. Others saw it as resignation. A few, the ones with sharper instincts, felt something else entirely. Unease. The kind you get when you realize you're standing on unstable ground but can't quite figure out why. The crew treated her absence of reaction as confirmation they were right to dismiss her. If she wasn't fighting back, she must not be worth fighting for. Commander Jackson led the charge, his disdain for her becoming a sport. He'd walk past her workstation and knock tools off the bench with his elbow, not even looking back as they clattered to the floor. When she picked them up without comment, he laughed. See? No spine. During a briefing in the operations room, he made her stand in the corner like a child while officers discussed classified mission parameters she wasn't cleared to hear. Even though her maintenance work on those very systems made her more familiar with them than half the people in that room. She stood there, expressionless, while they talked around her like she was furniture. Dr. Una Calder, the ship's lead engineer, took a different approach. She was methodical in her cruelty, surgical. When Kaylin submitted repair logs, Calder would tear them apart in front of junior techs, pointing out minor formatting errors while ignoring the substance. This is unacceptable. Redo it, all of it. It didn't matter that the work was solid. It mattered that Kaylin could be made to do it again, and again. And when she did without protest, Calder smiled. A cold, satisfied smile that said, see, I was right. She's nothing. Captain Ara Denning, the ship's second in command, took a more passive role. She simply pretended Kaylin didn't exist. In meetings where maintenance reports were essential, she'd call on anyone else, even officers with less technical knowledge, forcing them to fumble through explanations while Kaylin stood silently in the back with the answers. When pressed by others to include her input, Ara would wave a dismissive hand. I'm sure if it were important, someone qualified would have mentioned it. The message was clear. Kaylin wasn't qualified, would never be qualified, not in Ara's eyes. The midshipmen were worse. Young, arrogant, drunk on their fresh commissions, they treated her like a game. One of them, Ensign Hale, a name that should have carried weight but didn't in his hands, started a betting pool on how long she'd last. Over under 30 days before she transfers out. I'm saying she breaks in 2 weeks. They laughed about it openly in the mess hall while she ate her gray sludge 2 tables away. When she didn't react, they got bolder. One afternoon, Ensign Ryland, the communications officer, spilled his drink on her intentionally, then used her sleeve to wipe down a terminal. Oops, guess you're good for something after all. She didn't pull away, didn't say a word, just waited until he was done and went back to work. The breaking point should have come in the gym. Midshipman Lena Royce, daughter of a prominent admiral, was holding court with her circle of sycophants when Kaylin entered to use the facility during her assigned off hours. Lena looked her up and down with the kind of practiced disdain only privilege can perfect. This equipment is for officers. You want to work out, use the cargo bay. Haul some crates. Kaylin didn't argue, didn't explain she had as much right to be there as anyone. She just turned and left. Lena's laughter followed her down the corridor. Did you see that? She didn't even try. Pathetic. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that every insult, every humiliation, every calculated cruelty was being filed away. Not in anger, in assessment. Kaylin wasn't enduring. She was observing, learning who they were when they thought no one was watching, measuring the weight of their character and finding it lacking. The Black Panther training had taught her many things, but the most valuable lesson was this: people reveal themselves when they believe they're untouchable. And everyone on the Aegis 9 believed they were untouchable. The morning of the weapons bay incident started like any other. Kaylin received a maintenance order to recalibrate the targeting array in the restricted section, work that required precision and clearance most techs didn't have. She didn't question why they gave it to her. She just went. Spent hours in that dim space, hands steady, mind focused, fixing problems that would have taken others days to solve. She was finishing the final diagnostic when Jackson burst in with his squad. He'd been looking for a reason, any reason, and here she was in a restricted area alone, easy prey. Low-tier mechanic, no right. The words came fast, rehearsed like he'd been waiting for this moment. The guards moved without hesitation. They'd done this before, to others, to people who didn't matter, and in their eyes, Kaylin didn't matter either. The floor was cold against her cheek, the cuffs tight, her ID badge in someone's careless hands, just another nobody caught where she didn't belong. They were so sure, so confident, right up until the guard saw the tattoo and dismissed it anyway. Because why would someone like her have something like that? Then the door exploded open, and Admiral Hale's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. What made a man like Admiral Hale storm into that weapons bay with such fury? He wasn't the type to raise his voice. Everyone who knew Roderick Hale knew that. The man was a legend, a tactician who'd won battles with silence and strategy, who commanded respect not through volume but through presence. Officers straightened their spines when he entered a room. Admirals twice his age deferred to his judgment. And yet here he was, uniform pressed to perfection, ribbons gleaming on his chest, voice booming like he was calling down divine judgment. Release her. Now. The guards froze. One of them still had his hand on Kaylin's shoulder, pressing her down into the floor. He looked up at the Admiral, confused, maybe even annoyed. "Sir, she's unauthorized. We found her tampering with restricted." Hale cut him off. His hand came up, one finger pointing at the tattoo on Kaylin's wrist like it was a smoking gun. "Look at that tattoo." The guard glanced down, saw the Panther, didn't understand. "It's just ink, sir, some cheap." "No." Hale's voice dropped, went quiet, and somehow that was worse than the shouting. "That's not just ink. That's a Black Panther mark." The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Officers who'd been smirking seconds ago went pale, because everyone in the fleet knew the stories. The Black Panthers were ghosts from a war most people try to forget. Elite operatives so effective, so ruthless in their precision, that command had disbanded the unit out of fear. Fear of what they could do. Fear of what they represented. Only a handful had ever earned that mark. Most of them were dead. The rest were scattered, hidden, identities scrubbed from official records. And this woman, this nobody they'd been tormenting for 3 weeks, had that mark on her wrist. The cuffs came off. Kaylin stood slowly, rubbing her wrists where the metal had bitten in. She didn't look at Jackson, didn't acknowledge the guards, just straightened her jumpsuit and stood there waiting. Hale stepped closer, and for the first time his expression softened. "Colonel Voss." His voice carried respect now, actual respect. "I apologize for the treatment you've received on my ship. It was unacceptable." Still, Kaylin said nothing. Jackson's face went from red to white. "Colonel." His voice cracked on the word. "She's just a mechanic. We checked her file. Maintenance clearance only." Hale turned on him, and the look in his eyes could have melted steel. "Her file was classified above your pay grade, Commander. What you saw was a cover. What she is, what she's always been, is the most decorated operative in Black Panther history. 17 deep cover missions. 0 failures. She infiltrated enemy command structures so thoroughly they still haven't found all the damage she did. She's taken down warlords, dismantled terror cells, extracted hostages from situations we officially claim never happened. And you," he stepped closer to Jackson, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire room, "you put her in handcuffs." The silence that followed was suffocating. Someone's boot scuffed against the floor, and it sounded like thunder. Jackson tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air, but nothing came out. What could he say? What excuse could possibly matter now? Hale turned back to Kaylin. "Your orders, Colonel. We need you in command. The mission brief is waiting." She nodded once. Short. Clean. Then walked past them all, her steps measured, controlled, giving nothing away. The guards pressed themselves against the wall to let her pass. Jackson stared at the floor, and Hale followed her out, leaving the rest of them to marinate in the realization of what they'd done. But the revelation didn't end in that weapons bay. It rippled. Like dropping a stone in still water, the truth spread through the ship in waves. Within an hour, every crew member knew. The stray wasn't a stray. The mechanic wasn't a mechanic. The woman they'd mocked, starved, humiliated, was a decorated war hero operating under deep cover. And worse, she'd endured it all without breaking, without bending, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Dr. Calder heard the news in her lab. She dropped a tablet. The screen shattered on the floor, but she didn't notice. All those repair logs she'd torn apart, all those condescending lectures, they'd been directed at someone who could dismantle a bomb while under fire, who'd outsmarted enemy intelligence networks. Calder's hands shook. Captain Ara received the notification during a briefing. She stopped mid-sentence, read the message twice, then excused herself. In the privacy of her office, she sat in silence, replaying every meeting where she'd ignored Kaylin's presence, every dismissal, every time she'd looked past her like she was nothing. The weight of it settled on her chest like a stone. The midshipman's reaction was visceral. Ensign Hale, who'd started the betting pool, felt his stomach drop when his superior officer pulled him aside and explained exactly who they'd been mocking. His father, a rear admiral, was already being contacted. The fallout was coming. Lena Royce, who'd kicked Kaylin out of the gym, locked herself in her quarters. Her hands were shaking too hard to hold her comm device. The messages from her father were already starting to come through. Disappointment. Shame. Consequences. Sergeant Hatcher, the quartermaster who'd made Kaylin fish her access card out of the trash, was in the supply bay when he got the notification. He sat down hard on a crate, the reality hitting him like a physical blow. He'd mocked a Black Panther operative, made her wear salvage gear, treated her like refuse. His career was over. He knew it before anyone told him. Some things you don't come back from. The thing about truth is that it doesn't just reveal itself. It reconfigures everything that came before it. Every interaction, every insult, every moment of casual cruelty had to be re-examined through a new lens. And in that re-examination, the crew of the Aegis 9 found something they didn't want to see. Themselves, their arrogance, their cruelty, their fundamental failure of character, because Kaylin hadn't been weak, she'd been patient, she hadn't been broken, she'd been watching. And now, every single one of them had to face what they'd revealed about themselves when they thought no one important was paying attention. How do you apologize to someone you've treated like garbage when you discover they're a legend? The answer is you don't. Not really. Because apologies require the person you wronged to believe you're sorry, and why would they? Why would Kaylin Voss believe anything these people said after weeks of systematic degradation? The smart ones knew this. They kept their distance, hoped their names wouldn't end up on whatever report was being filed. The desperate ones tried anyway, and it was painful to watch. Lieutenant Brevin, the safety officer who'd sent her into toxic fumes without proper equipment, was the first. He found her in the corridor outside the Admiral's briefing room, shifted his weight from foot to foot like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Colonel Voss, I wanted to." She kept walking. Didn't slow down, didn't look at him, just moved past like he was air. He stood there in the empty corridor, words dying in his throat, realizing that his apology meant nothing. Less than nothing. It was self-serving, a plea for mercy disguised as remorse. Ensign Ryland, who'd used her sleeve as a rag, tried a different approach. He left a formal written apology outside her new quarters, the ones that had been hastily reassigned to her on the officer's deck. She found it when she returned from the command briefing. Read it once, then used it to line the bottom of a drawer. Didn't throw it away, didn't respond to it, just filed it under things that don't matter and moved on. The message was clear. His words had no weight. Dr. Calder tried to salvage what she could of her professional relationship. She requested a meeting, was granted 5 minutes in a conference room with 2 other officers present. "Colonel, I want to acknowledge that my treatment of your work was unprofessional." Kaylin sat across from her, hands folded on the table, expression neutral. Calder continued, stumbling over prepared remarks that sounded hollow in the sterile room. "Your technical expertise is, I should have recognized." "I let personal bias." She trailed off. Kaylin hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. "Was this meeting about your work, doctor, or your guilt?" The question landed like a blade. Calder opened her mouth, closed it. Nothing she could say would be the right answer because they both knew the truth. This meeting was about Calder trying to save her career, not about making amends. The crew learned quickly that Kaylin wasn't interested in their explanations, their justifications, their belated recognition of her worth. She'd spent 3 weeks being invisible. Now she was making them invisible. She walked past former tormentors without acknowledgement, attended briefings where they stammered through reports while she took notes, her presence a silent indictment of their incompetence. When forced to interact, she was professionally courteous and nothing more. No warmth, no forgiveness. Just the bare minimum required by protocol. Captain Ara tried a different approach. She publicly announced new ship policies designed to prevent the kind of treatment Kaylin had endured. Harassment protocols, equipment access reforms, dignity standards for all crew regardless of rank. It was a good speech. Well written, delivered with apparent sincerity. When she finished, she looked directly at Kaylin, who sat in the front row of the assembly. "Colonel Voss, I hope these changes demonstrate our commitment to." Kaylin stood up. Walked out mid-sentence. Left Ara standing at the podium, words hanging in the air. The entire crew watching a woman who'd been invisible for weeks make her opinion devastatingly clear. Policies didn't erase actions. Words didn't undo damage. And Ara's commitment meant nothing when it only appeared after the consequences became unavoidable. The midshipmen had it worst. They were young enough to still believe in redemption, old enough to understand they destroyed their own futures. Ensign Hale tried to approach Kaylin in the officers' mess, his prepared speech dying on his lips when she looked at him with the kind of empty expression usually reserved for looking at walls. She didn't hate him. That would have implied he mattered. She just didn't see him anymore. He was a ghost in his own life now, haunting spaces where he'd once held court, invisible to the only person whose opinion suddenly carried weight. Lena Royce sent 3 messages requesting a private conversation. All went unanswered. She tried intercepting Kaylin in the corridor. Kaylin walked past her like she wasn't there, continued her conversation with another officer without breaking stride. Lena stood frozen, feeling exactly what she'd made Kaylin feel. Dismissed. Erased. The difference was, Kaylin had earned her position. Lena had merely inherited one, and now everyone knew it. But there was one person who didn't try to apologize. One person who stood apart from the desperate scramble for redemption. Commander Tyne, the ship's tactical officer and Admiral Hale's right hand. He'd been off-ship during Kaylin's first 3 weeks, returning the day after the weapons bay incident. When he heard what happened, he didn't seek her out. Didn't add his voice to the chorus of hollow apologies. He just watched. Observed how she moved through the ship now, no longer invisible but not quite visible either, existing in a space she'd carved out through sheer will. Their first interaction came during a tactical briefing. Kaylin presented her assessment of the weapons systems, her analysis precise and devastating in its accuracy. When she finished, Tyne nodded once. "Good work, Colonel, that's all. No false praise, no overcompensation, just professional recognition delivered without ceremony." After the meeting, he fell into step beside her in the corridor. "You didn't have to take it." His voice was quiet. "You could have ended it at any time." She glanced at him, could have, didn't need to. He nodded slowly, understanding something the others missed. "You were testing us, all of us." She didn't confirm or deny, just kept walking. And Tyne, unlike the others, didn't need her to explain. He'd seen what she'd seen. The crew had failed. Not a test they knew they were taking. The test that mattered. The one that revealed who they were when they thought no one was keeping score. What happens when the people who broke you suddenly need you to save them? The answer came 3 days later when the Aegis 9 received an encrypted distress signal from a deep space research station. The message was fragmented, partially corrupted, but the pieces that came through were enough to turn blood cold. Attack. Multiple hostiles. Research compromised. Need immediate extraction. The station housed classified weapons development projects. If those files fell into enemy hands, the strategic implications would ripple across 3 sectors. Admiral Hale called an emergency briefing. The senior staff assembled in the war room, faces grim, knowing what this meant. The station is in hostile territory. Hale's finger traced the route on the holographic display. Any rescue operation would require infiltration, not force. We'd need someone who can slip past enemy surveillance, navigate their security protocols, extract the personnel and data without triggering a firefight that would destroy everything we're trying to save. He paused. "Let the weight of it settle. We need a Black Panther." The room went silent. Everyone knew there was only one person on the ship who fit that description. Captain Ara cleared her throat. "Colonel Voss, your assessment." Kaylin stood from her position against the back wall, moved to the display, studied the tactical overlay. She didn't speak immediately, just analyzed, calculated. Ran scenarios in her head that the others couldn't begin to imagine. The station's compromised here and here. She pointed to 2 sections. Their security grid will be offline. That's intentional. They're funneling response teams into kill zones. Standard insurgent tactics. Dr. Calder leaned forward. "How do you know it's insurgents? Could be pirates. Equipment failure." Kaylin's look could have frozen nitrogen. "Because I've run this exact operation from the other side. In the Kandari sector, 5 years ago." She turned back to the display. "They'll have hostages in the primary research lab, not to ransom, to slow down any rescue attempt. Make us choose between the people and the data." Commander Tyne crossed his arms. "What would you do?" She zoomed in on a section of the station. "Enter through the waste reclamation system here. It's unmapped in their security database. Most stations skip it because it's miserable work and who bothers with garbage chutes." She traced a route with her finger. "Navigate the maintenance crawlspace to the primary lab. Extract the hostages through the emergency medical bay. Blow the data servers so nothing's recoverable. Then exit through the cargo launch system." The entire operation would take 90 minutes. 2 hours if complications arise. Ara shook her head. "That's impossible. The waste system is too narrow. You'd need someone small, highly trained, willing to crawl through refuse in zero-oxygen environment, not to mention navigating hostile territory while extracting civilians who will panic. The skill set required, she stopped, realized what she was saying, realized who she was saying it to. Kalen's expression didn't change. You're right, Captain. The skill set required is rare, extremely rare. The kind of skill set that gets forged in units that no longer officially exist. The kind that gets you a Black Panther tattoo on your wrist. Hale stepped in. Colonel Voss, I'm not ordering you to do this. This crew hasn't earned the right to ask anything of you, but those researchers didn't. They're just scientists, doing their jobs, and they're going to die if someone doesn't go in after them. She looked at him, really looked, saw the weight he carried, the responsibility that aged him beyond his years. This wasn't manipulation. This was a man asking someone to save innocent lives because it was the right thing to do, not because the Aegis 9 deserved her help, because the people trapped on that station deserved a chance. She turned to the tactical display. I'll need zero interference. No backup. No communications once I'm inside. If I call for extraction, you come immediately, no questions. If you don't hear from me in 3 hours, you leave. Admiral Hale nodded. Agreed. Commander Tyne will pilot the insertion shuttle. He's the only one I trust not to get you killed before you even reach the station. Preparations took 6 hours. Kalen requisitioned equipment from the armory, her selections precise. No heavy weapons, no armor, just lightweight gear designed for speed and silence. A tactical blade, a compact sidearm, climbing gear, a portable data terminal. The quartermaster, still Sergeant Hatcher until his formal discharge processed, brought her the requested items. His hands shook as he laid them on the counter. Colonel, as she picked up the blade, tested its weight. This isn't sharp enough. He blinked. I can. No, she set it down. I'll sharpen it myself. Can't trust the edge if I didn't hone it. He stood there wanting to say something, anything that might ease the crushing weight of his guilt. But she'd already moved on, checking the rest of the gear, and he understood. This was as close to forgiveness as he'd ever get. The fact that she trusted him to bring her equipment without sabotage. That was something, small, insignificant, but something. In the shuttle bay, Tyne ran pre-flight checks while Kalen secured her gear. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. He understood what she was doing, understood why. And unlike the others, he wasn't going to burden her with gratitude or apology before she went into a situation that might kill her. Admiral Hale appeared at the shuttle door. Colonel. She looked up from her equipment check. Sir. He stepped inside, lowered his voice so only she could hear. I know what you're thinking, that we don't deserve this. That they don't deserve you risking your life. You're right, we don't, but I'm asking anyway, not for us, for them, the people on that station. She finished strapping down her gear, then stood, met his eyes. I'm not doing this for the crew, Admiral. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because those researchers didn't do anything wrong except work on the wrong project in the wrong place at the wrong time. They deserve someone who'll come for them when everyone else says it's too risky. He nodded. That's why you're the one going, not just because you're capable, because you're the kind of person who goes anyway. Shuttle launched in silence. Tyne piloted with the kind of precision that came from years of experience. Kalen sat in the back, eyes closed, running through the operation in her mind. Every step, every contingency, every way it could go wrong and how she'd adapt. This was what she'd been trained for, what she'd done a dozen times before in worse situations with less support. The Aegis 9 crew's betrayal hadn't broken her. It had reminded her why she did this work in the first place. Not for recognition. Not for respect. For the people who couldn't save themselves. The ones everyone else had forgotten. Tyne's voice crackled through her headset. 5 minutes to drop point. She opened her eyes, checked her gear one last time. 5 minutes. That's all the time between safety and chaos. Between the person she'd been pretending to be and the person she actually was. The shuttle shuddered as it entered the debris field surrounding the station. Tyne navigated through drifting metal and frozen gas with hands steady as stone. 2 minutes. She moved to the cargo door, magnetic boots keeping her anchored. The station loomed ahead, dark except for emergency lights flickering in irregular patterns. She could see the damage, hull breaches, scorch marks, Signs of a fight that ended badly. 1 minute. The door opened. Vacuum pulled at her. She held on, waited for the precise moment. Drop, she let go, pushed off, floated through space toward the waste reclamation port, her trajectory calculated to within centimeters. Behind her, the shuttle peeled away, time following extraction protocols. She was alone now, the way she preferred it, the way it always ended up. Just her, the mission, and the truth that had sustained her through 3 weeks of humiliation. She didn't need them to see her. She only needed to see herself clearly, and she did. She always had. Why do the people who survive impossible situations never look like what we expect? The waste reclamation port was exactly where Kaylin expected it, neglected, corroded, the kind of entry point security systems ignore because who'd be desperate enough to use it. She activated her magnetic grapple, pulled herself through the narrow opening into darkness that smelled of old mistakes and chemical decay. The space was tight, barely wider than her shoulders. Zero gravity made it manageable, barely. She navigated by touch and memory of similar stations, her fingers finding handholds on pipes that groaned under her weight. Behind her, the port sealed automatically. No going back now, only forward, through the refuse, through the darkness, toward people who had no idea someone was coming. The crawl space opened into a maintenance shaft. Still tight, still dark, but vertical now. She oriented herself, checked her tactical display. The station's power grid was failing. Life support running on emergency reserves. She had 2 hours, maybe less. The hostiles would be securing the research lab, probably 5 or 6 of them, professional, armed, not expecting resistance from inside. That was her advantage, the only one she'd need. She climbed, hand over hand, meter by meter. Her breathing controlled despite the exertion. This was meditation for her, the physical challenge that quieted everything else, just movement and purpose. Voices echoed through the shaft. She froze, listened. 2 hostiles, arguing in clipped, efficient language she recognized, Kandari insurgents, just like she'd suspected. They were debating whether to execute the hostages now or wait for their commander's order. One wanted to move fast, the other wanted confirmation. They settled on waiting, moved on. Kaylin resumed climbing, reached a junction point, paused to check her bearings. The research lab was 3 levels up. The hostages would be in the primary workspace. Data servers in the adjacent room. She'd have to split her focus. Save the people, destroy the information. In that order, always in that order. She emerged from the shaft into a corridor. Dim emergency lighting cast everything in red, blood on the walls, recent, still wet. The fight here had been brief, one-sided. Security personnel never stood a chance. She counted bodies as she moved. 4 guards, 2 researchers who tried to run. The insurgents were efficient, brutal, exactly what she'd been trained to fight against. She reached the lab entrance, sealed, magnetically locked from inside. She pulled out her data terminal, connected it to the door's control panel, began bypassing the encryption. This part took time, patience. While alarms screamed inside her head telling her every second mattered, her hand stayed steady. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Inside, 6 hostages sat bound in the center of the room. 3 insurgents stood guard, weapons ready, not expecting the door to open from outside their control. Kaylin didn't hesitate. The first hostile went down before he registered her presence. The second turned, got his weapon halfway up before her blade found his throat. The third was faster, got a shot off that missed her head by centimeters. She closed the distance, disarmed him, put him down. 7 seconds, 3 hostiles neutralized. The hostages stared at her in shock. She moved to them, started cutting restraints. Don't speak, don't run, follow exactly where I point. They nodded, too terrified to do anything else. She led them back through the corridor, her blade ready, her senses alert for the other insurgents she knew were coming. The data servers were in the next room. She left the hostages crouched in an alcove, told them with a look to stay. They stayed. She entered the server room. The equipment was still active, downloading files, transmitting data off station. She had minutes before the transfer completed. She planted charges, small, precise, enough to destroy everything without breaching the hull. Set the timer for 5 minutes, turned to leave. The commander was waiting in the doorway, taller than the others. Older, scars on his face that told stories she recognized. He smiled, didn't raise his weapon, just looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. Black Panther. His voice carried respect and hatred in equal measure. "I've killed 3 of you." She didn't reply, didn't need to. He continued, "You know there's more of us. Even if you get these people out, even if you destroy the data, we'll find another target, another station." His smile widened. "You can't save everyone, true." Her voice was quiet, calm, "but I can save these 6. Today, that's enough." They moved at the same time. His weapon came up. She was already inside his range. The fight was brief, brutal. He was good, trained, experienced, but she was better, always had been, always would be. When it ended, he was on the floor, bleeding, looking up at her with something like admiration. "You should have been one of us." She shook her head. "No, I chose a different path." Then left him there to consider his choices while the charges counted down. The hostages followed her without question now. She led them through maintenance tunnels, through sealed corridors, through sections of the station she navigated by instinct and training. Behind them, the charges detonated, a muffled thump that shook the walls but held the hull intact. The data was gone, the mission nearly complete. The cargo launch system was her exit plan, a small pod designed for emergency equipment ejection, not rated for human transport. Definitely not rated for 7 people. She overrode the safety protocols, crammed the hostages inside. They protested. "Too small, can't fit, won't work." She made it work because there wasn't another option. She sealed them in, set the launch sequence. The pod ejected with a force that would bruise them all. Better bruised than dead. She triggered her beacon. Commander Tyne would intercept the pod, get them to safety. Her part was done. Except she was still inside the station. The launch system was one shot, no way out for her now. The hostages safe meant she'd succeeded. If she died here, the mission was still a success. That calculus was familiar, she'd made it before, would make it again if she survived this. She moved through the dying station toward the main hangar. There was one shuttle left, damaged, probably not functional, but maybe, just maybe. The insurgents found her halfway there. The remaining 3, they were angry now, sloppy. She was calm, precise. The fight didn't last long. The shuttle was worse than she thought. Hull breach, power cells depleted, navigation system offline. She had one shot, override the emergency launch, manual piloting, no navigation, no safety system, just her and momentum and the slim chance she could vector toward the Aegis 9 before life support failed. She strapped in, fired the engines. The shuttle lurched forward, groaning like dying machinery, but it moved. That was enough. She was clear of the station, drifting now. Sending out a distress beacon that might reach them, might not. In the cockpit, alone in the black, she thought about the 3 weeks she'd spent being invisible. The humiliation, the cruelty, the systematic attempt to break her down, and she smiled. Not because it had been easy, because it had been necessary. She'd needed to see them, really see them, understand what they became when they thought no one was watching. And now she knew. Some had failed. Some had passed without realizing there was a test. And a handful, like Tyne, like Admiral Hale, had remained decent even when decency wasn't required. Those were the ones worth fighting beside, worth risking everything for. The rest were just noise. The shuttle's systems failed one by one. Life support, communications, heat. Cold seeped in. She didn't panic, just waited, kept breathing, conserved energy. The rescue would come, or it wouldn't. Either way, she'd done what needed doing. Saved 6 people who deserved saving, destroyed data that would have killed thousands, exposed the truth about the crew she'd been assigned to. All of it mattered. All of it had purpose. Even if this was the end. But it wasn't the end. Through the frozen viewport she saw lights, movement, a shuttle matching her trajectory. Commander Tyne's voice crackled through dying communications. "Hang on, Colonel, we've got you." The shuttle docked. Hands pulled her through into warmth. Admiral Hale was there. "Colonel Voss, the hostages are safe. The data destroyed. You did it." She nodded, couldn't speak yet, throat too cold, but she met his eyes. And in that moment there was understanding. This wasn't about capability. It was never about capability. It was about character. About who you were when everything was stripped away except the choice to do right or do nothing. She'd made her choice. They'd made theirs. and now everyone had to live with the consequences. What do you say to someone who saved lives while the people who tormented her watched from safety? The truth is, most said nothing. They couldn't find words that didn't sound hollow. Kaylin returned to the Aegis 9 wrapped in thermal blankets, frostbite on her fingers, exhaustion in every movement. The medical bay patched her up. 3 hours of treatment, minor injuries that could have been catastrophic. She was released with orders to rest. Didn't follow them, went straight to debrief. Admiral Hale kept it brief, recorded her tactical report, commended her performance, then dismissed everyone except himself and Commander Tyne. The room felt different when it was just the three of them, smaller, more honest. Hale leaned back in his chair. You didn't have to do it. She flexed her bandaged fingers. Yes, I did, but not for the reasons you think. Tyne spoke up from his position by the door. You were proving something, not to us, to yourself. She glanced at him, maybe. Or maybe I was just doing my job. The job doesn't care if people respect me, it just needs doing. Hale nodded slowly. And now? What happens now? She stood, straightened her uniform. Now I submit my transfer request. I've completed the mission I was assigned. Deep cover assessment of crew integrity and tactical readiness. My report will not be favorable. The silence that followed was heavy. Hale had suspected she was more than she appeared, but this confirmed it. The entire 3 weeks had been an evaluation, a test that nearly everyone had failed spectacularly, and now the consequences would ripple through careers and commands for years. Your recommendation, she met his eyes. Commander Tyne is fit for higher command. You already knew that. Promote him. Captain Ara should be reassigned to administrative duty where her biases can't endanger personnel. Dr. Calder needs ethics retraining or discharge. The midshipmen, she paused, most of them need to be removed from service entirely. They lack the fundamental character required for leadership. The crew follows their officer's example. Fix the leadership, you might salvage the crew. Hale absorbed this. Didn't argue, didn't defend his people, just processed the brutal honesty of someone who'd seen them at their worst. And yourself, Colonel, where will you go? She moved toward the door. Wherever command sends me next, probably another ship, another crew that needs evaluation, another 3 weeks of being treated like nothing to see who people really are. Tyne stepped aside to let her pass. Is it worth it? Living like that? She paused in the doorway, looked back at them both. Someone has to. Someone has to be willing to be invisible, to endure, to document what people become when they think no one important is watching, because that's who they really are, and the fleet needs to know. She left them there, walked through corridors that felt different now. People moved aside, saluted, watched her pass with expressions ranging from shame to awe. She ignored them all, returned to her quarters on the officer's deck, the ones they'd reassigned after her identity was revealed, locked the door, sat on the edge of the bunk, and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. 3 weeks of systematic cruelty, 3 weeks of being less than human in their eyes. She'd endured because she had to. Because the mission required it, because someone needed to document their failure, but it had cost her, in ways they'd never see, in ways she'd never show. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it. Commander Tyne stood there, 2 cups of real coffee in his hands, not the synthetic mess hall garbage, actual coffee. Thought you might need this. She took the cup, gestured him inside. They sat in silence for a moment, just 2 soldiers who understood the cost of duty. He spoke first. You're not transferring. She raised an eyebrow. My report will be filed, but Admiral Hale's already drafting orders to make you the new captain. Ara's being reassigned tonight. The midshipmen are being dishonorably discharged. Most of the officers who participated are facing formal inquiries. But you, he met her eyes, you're being given command. The Aegis 9 is yours, if you want it. She sipped the coffee. Bitter, perfect. Why would I want it after everything they did? He smiled, thin, tired, because someone needs to rebuild this crew, teach them how to be better. And you're the only one who's earned the right to do it. You didn't break, you didn't become them. You stayed exactly who you were despite everything they threw at you. That's the kind of leader they need. The kind who leads by example even when no one's watching. She considered this. The bitter truth that sometimes the hardest duty is staying. fighting to fix what's broken rather than walking away from the wreckage. In the days that followed, the changes came fast. Jackson was gone within 12 hours. Career ended, escorted off ship without ceremony. Dr. Calder fought her reassignment, lost, was transferred to a research station so remote she'd have no contact with military personnel for years. Captain Ara accepted her demotion with dignity she hadn't shown before. Maybe losing everything had taught her something, maybe not. Either way, she was someone else's problem now. The midshipmen departed in shame. Families notified, privileges revoked, futures rewritten. Sergeant Hatcher finished his service in the recycling center, a fitting end to a career built on treating people like refuse. But some consequences were more subtle, more personal. The crew learned that Colonel Kaylin Voss wasn't the forgiving type. She was fair, professional, but the warmth, the easy camaraderie that comes with trust, she reserved for the handful who'd passed her unannounced test. Commander Tyne became her second. Admiral Hale remained a mentor. A few junior officers who'd never participated in the cruelty found themselves promoted, given opportunities. The rest learned to work under a commanding officer who saw them exactly as they were. No delusions, no second chances unearned. The mess hall dynamics shifted overnight. Officers who'd once held court now ate quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. The maintenance staff, once dismissed and degraded, found themselves invited to briefings, their input valued, their expertise recognized. Kaylin didn't do this for show. She did it because it was right, because competence mattered more than rank, because the people doing the hard work deserved respect, not derision. The crew adapted, slowly. Some never did. They requested transfers, were granted them. Better they leave than poison the culture she was building. One evening, months after the Weapons Bay incident, Kaylin returned to the lower decks. Not to work, to remember. She stood outside the converted storage closet that had been her cell. The leak was fixed now. The space converted back to storage. She placed her hand on the door frame, felt the cold metal, remembered the jeers, the humiliation, the systematic attempt to break her spirit. Commander Tyne found her there. "Thought I'd find you here." She didn't turn around. "Does it still bother you?" The question he'd asked before. She considered it. "No, it reminds me why I do this, why I stayed. Someone has to be willing to be treated like nothing to document who people really are. Someone has to endure to protect the ones who can't." They stood in silence, two people who understood the cost of duty, the weight of command, the necessity of sacrifice. Finally, Kaylin turned away from the closet, from the past, from the darkness that had tested her and found her unbreakable. "Let's go, the ship needs us." And they walked together toward the bridge, toward the future she was building from the wreckage of what had been. A future where character mattered more than rank, where dignity wasn't a privilege but a right, where the invisible were finally seen. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't demand. It doesn't plead for recognition or respect. It simply endures, simply acts, simply exists with such quiet certainty that eventually, inevitably, the truth reveals itself. Not because dignity needs vindication, but because truth has a way of surfacing even when buried deep beneath cruelty and contempt. Kaylin Voss had learned this long before the Aegis 9, had carried it through missions that officially never happened, through darkness that would have broken lesser people. She didn't need them to see her. She only needed to see herself clearly. And in that clarity, in that unshakable knowledge of who she was regardless of how others chose to perceive her, she found the strength to endure anything, to survive everything, and ultimately to lead not through force, but through the undeniable example of what it means to remain human even when treated as less than one.